Good morning and welcome to the 1 to 10 podcast with 110 Associates. As always, the mission is to inspire, motivate and educate those who are looking to become COOs or CFOs, whilst at the same time giving a platform of value to those already in that seat who are eager to hear from the experiences and lessons from some of their peers. With me today is Steve Emsley, who is CFO at DRC Capital. Great guy, someone I've known for a long time, and I think also brings a slightly different dynamic to this podcast in that Steve is an example of someone who has made the path to CFO internally without having to make a move. Yeah, despite being a Liverpool fan, I always have a lot of time and love for him. So Steve, thank you for joining us. How are you? You all right?
Very well. Thank you for mentioning Liverpool at this time.
I couldn't have done it last year. I would have had to stay quiet. So it's
you still should. You still should. We're still champions, but I'm well. Thank you, Khuram. Apart from that.
Good. And look, thanks for joining us. I guess from our side, Steve, obviously got a set of questions that we'd like to work through with you. So without further ado, let's get into it. I guess for everyone listening, Steve, kind of what's your background? How did you get to the CFO position? And I guess, was it something that you always aspired to be?
Yeah, so I think after qualifying with BDO in audit, sort of standard route really, which was great, by the way. They put me in the real estate team as well as a bit of professional services clients. So I got an interest in real estate straight away. It kind of just suited me and something I found interesting. So after qualifying there, I very soon moved into industry. And I guess from that point, yes, it was always the plan to get to FD/CFO as the ultimate goal. Fortunately, it happened reasonably quickly, and I was really pleased with that. But yeah, it was ultimately the goal. I guess my path after BDO was moving into industry, found a great role at Hermes Real Estate. What was great about them was that they were, very large, very institutional. So I sort of learned the ropes at a really good place. Worked with some really good people. Learned a lot from them and how they sort of operated, and got sort of fully immersed in real estate and the funds industry. Got exposed to some pretty sort of meaty transactions and just interesting stuff. Moved to a smaller boutique to get the FC role, a small sort of special situations real estate investor, again funds based, and then the opportunity at DRC Capital came along, where I've been for sort of 6.5 years now. Yeah, as you say, I joined as a number 2, and then sort of within a year, the existing CFO Richard Day moved on to another opportunity at a real estate investor, and fortunately, I guess I'd shown enough and was seen as a potential suitor to the CFO role. So they gave me an interim position, head of fund finance. I was kind of heading up the finance side of the business then, albeit under watch from the experienced people around me. And then eventually I moved into CFO role, which I've been doing for sort of just over 4 years now. So yeah, it's been a really good sort of career development over a reasonably short period of time, and I've been quite fortunate. So I guess that's how I've got to where I've got to so far.
Yeah, no, great. And I guess an interesting story for, I guess, junior candidates or junior profiles that are coming up through the industry to, it shows that you don't necessarily have to always be moving around, but, if you get the right foundation and base in place and I guess with the right attitude and I guess timing as well, right? Being in the right place at the right time, it can kind of prove fruitful. I guess for you then, Steve, clearly coming with that ambition of growing into a CFO, and then ending up at DRC, where you're then, with almost quite quickly thrown into the deep end and facing that prospect of your ambition becoming a reality. What would you say were the biggest challenges at that time for you?
Yeah, I guess I would start by saying I think it's unfair to say I was thrown in the deep end. I did have good support around me. They hired in a sort of an experienced COO at the time that the CFO left. which meant that the CFO seat was there for me to grow into, but also I did have some structure and some guidance above me, as well as the partners as well, who I worked closely with. That being said, yeah, it was, a steep learning curve and something I really enjoyed. I think the thing that stuck out to me was the breadth of the role and the responsibility suddenly just increased sort of exponentially. All of a sudden you were moving from doing your finance role, reporting into the FD or CFO, having your sort of cyclical workload and a bit extra, to bang, you've got this huge breadth of roles. You've got to manage a bunch of different stakeholders all of a sudden, and you sort of, you have a lot of conflicting workflows going on at the same time. Obviously with teams below you to help you sort of achieve that, but the ability to sort of step out of that and take a strategic view and organize yourself to get all that stuff done, that was something that sort of really came to bear when I did step up. And it was something that, for someone making that jump from number 2 to number 1, I'd say that was the biggest thing that jumped out to me.
Cool. And I guess now we're, what, 2-3 years into your tenure, shall we say?
I think it's 4 now, but yeah,
4
3
years,
or 4, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
apologies.
Yeah.
But I guess from your side, looking back, what would you say have been the top 3 or the key skills that you needed to fulfill your role successfully?
Yeah, so I think I've just touched upon number 1, which is the ability to step back and take a view with a view to strategy, with a view to what you're ultimately trying to achieve, taking a step back from the multitude of workflows that you've got sort of running, and keeping a focus on when things need to be done, what are the priorities. You as an FC maybe, and a group of accountants, you can kind of just get your job done in line with the time, and that's good. I think as a CFO, FD, you've got to think, I've got this that needs doing, then I've got this that needs doing, this has this lead on, this is where we're trying to get to ultimately. There's a lot more sort of ability, requirement to focus on ultimate goals and how you get there, rather than just focusing on the journey. So I think that's number 1. I think number 2 is, an ability to communicate clearly. I've worked with some amazing technical accountants who have not been able to communicate to peers, to managers, to investors, what they have worked on, what they're trying to get across, whether it's financial or non-financial information. I think that's absolutely key. And I think, I pride myself on that, to be honest, to an extent. And I think that's what's enabled me to sort of step up internally. I think the managers, the partners here, they know what I'm trying to do. They know, when I'm presenting results, they get the point. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely key. You can be as good an accountant technically as you want, but you need to be able to get this across, particularly to non-financial individuals. They need to understand what you're getting at, otherwise it's meaningless and they'll switch off. Third one, I think it's kind of linked to the other point, but it's just an ability to plan ahead. You need some organization to be able to do that. You need to focus on, obviously there's always going to be cyclical work and workflows with an operations finance based role, but it's also planning ahead for the big events like fund launches, like investor closings, like investor AGMs, other key dates in the diary. You've got to work back and plan ahead, so that the workflows and the multitude of sort of workflows with different individuals contributing can be sort of delivered. That's absolutely key. It's kind of linked to the first point, I guess. You cannot just focus on your role and getting your job done. It's really managing the whole process, taking responsibility for that, even if you're not doing the work. So those are the 3 to me I found it absolutely key in my role.
I guess going back to your second point, then I guess paramount importance is how well you get on with your principals, right? And the fact that you buy into them, but equally they buy into you, and you manage, for example, to, I guess, manifest that ability to influence and almost gain their respect, right? Have that credibility with them.
Yeah, I think it's one thing whether you're liked or not, and hopefully I am, but I think the other thing is whether you're trusted and whether they feel good about you, the information that you're providing, and how you're dealing with that side of the business, generally. I mean, the 3 partners I've got at DRC, which are Dale, Rob and Cyrus, that's how we came up with the name. They are all quite different individually, I have a kind of different relationship with all of them, but I think they all fundamentally trust what I'm trying to get across to them, and that if they give me something to do, which isn't on the investment side of the business, which is kind of what primarily two of them are focused on, you know, it will be done, and it will be done on time. So yeah, it's more about trust as well as hopefully them liking you as a person as well.
Cool. And I guess right now then, not necessarily probing into where you guys are as a business, but in terms of the challenges you face as the CFO, what would you say your daily challenges are? And I appreciate some of that might be in line with the points you've mentioned, but.
Yeah, I think for me personally, my role, the daily challenges are, I think stakeholder management. I think, yeah, that move up from number 2 to number 1, you suddenly have a bunch of different stakeholders that you are sort of working to. They could be, obviously, you've got your immediate boss, you've got the ultimate owners of the business, but then you've got all of a sudden investors, you've got third-party financiers and other sort of parties such as that. And all of these guys need managing. They have separate workflows, and there's a bunch of sort of relationship liaison that you need to keep on top of, let alone the work that you're doing for them. So I think that's a big challenge with the role, something that I've learned a lot about over the last few years, and that's been quite a learning curve. I think the other big learning curve, and I think this is just generally for anyone sort of moving up the ranks a bit, is team management. I find it quite interesting that you do not, well, maybe if you do an MBA, but for those that don't, you don't get taught this stuff ever. You can learn from good managers you work with. You can learn from bad managers that you work with, which I have done in the past as well.
Yeah.
But you don't learn this with your professional qualification or your degree. So all of a sudden you're doing well in your career. You thrust up a notch. You build a team or you inherit a team, and you're dealing with interpersonal relationships. You're dealing with individuals who might work in a different way to you, and you're dealing with the requirement all of a sudden to delegate and sort of give other people abilities to develop, which you just do not learn. You're not taught. So I think that's been a big challenge in the past, not just in the CFO seat, but just on my path generally. I don't think I always understood how important it was, or sort of managed it as well as I'd hoped. So now I've got a really good team that I work with and who work for me, and I think the ability to sort of manage them, to give them a responsibility, but also keep in mind their development, the way that they work personally as individuals, I think that's absolutely key. And that's been quite a big challenge, and I would expect it's been quite a big challenge for a lot of people. Yeah,
that lends well onto, I guess, the next question then, in terms of, have there been any failures or I guess hurdles over the however many years that have you feel helped shape you for this role?
Yeah, I think I'd stick with the team management. I think it's a good point. I think that's the one that I wouldn't say I've massively failed, but I'd say there's been definitely learning points. I think you need to be able to delegate. You need to be able to give these guys responsibility. I was always, take responsibility for stuff. If it needs to be done well, do it myself, which is not always the best approach. So you've got to keep in mind you can do more as a team if you delegate more. Give these guys responsibility. This will help them develop too. I definitely didn't get that balance right in the past. You need to consider the way that other people work. Again, something that I've learned through experience. I think, other people might have a very different approach, but be just as effective as you are. And I think from experience, that's something I've also learned and applied going forward. So I think team management has been a big one for me. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think from our side, we see a lot of people where, there is that natural tendency to, it's almost kind of self-preservation mode, right? So if I delegate this part of my role, do I become less valuable? Or if I lose control of this, is that going to work against me, etc.? So I can kind of see, and for me as well, you see various types of leaders, and I guess I've always kind of judged, you get certain leaders that are kind of, for them, success is, if I hire this person and he or she succeeds me, I've done a great job. But then you also get leaders who are kind of, oh, hang on, I'm going to hire this person, but they need to stay in their box and you know, they can't be a threat. And it's interesting seeing the different dynamics at play. But for you, in terms of the role currently and the company, what would you say are the most enjoyable aspects, and what do you love about what you do? What gets you up in the morning and, you know, makes you feel warm and fuzzy about your day?
So I do love my role, and I do love where I work. I have to say, it's been 6.5 years and it has flown by. I think the role is, I've always had sort of hungry desire to take more on and to ultimately get my arms around as much of the business as possible in terms of view to what we're doing in the strategy. It's something that's always sort of driven me, and that is the best thing about my role here. I do get exposure to that. I think that's kind of linked into the thing that I enjoy most about DRC Capital. So for those that don't know, DRC Capital, we sort of 10 to 12 years now, we were at the forefront of a bunch of sort of alternate lenders in the commercial real estate space, essentially debt funds that were an alternate to banks who all of a sudden sort of retracted in the wake of the global financial crisis 2008-9. We were one of the forefronts, and we're kind of, up until recently, we were the only independent business doing that of size that specialized in debt funds only. So the best thing about our business is that it still feels like a reasonably small business. We're 25 to 30 people. We're just dedicated to that sort of commercial real estate debt funds. We don't do any other sort of property investment. So we're quite small. It's quite entrepreneurial in its feel. It's run by 3 partners who you sit next to, so you get a great view to the strategy and on what the business is doing. At the same time, it's a significant business. I think we're the 5th or 6th biggest debt fund advisor in Europe. We've got 4 billion under management, so it's significant scale. You're dealing with significant investors, significant funds, and we are a sort of a major name in our industry. So that contrast between it feeling quite entrepreneurial, you having a big say and impact onto how the business is run, you know, conflicting with the fact that the business is a major player in this industry, I think is the best thing about working with DRC Capital. And being part of that growth to this point has been something that's been really great to be part of.
No, brilliant, yeah. It sounds quite impressive when you say it like that. I guess day to day you don't really, you know, whenever we...
Yeah, it's things like this that actually make you stop and think, and actually, that was the thing that jumped out at me, and is still applicable today. So it is really good.
No, fair play. So on to apologies, obviously, given what we do, there needs to be an element of self-serving aspect to the call. So I guess when you have looked at hiring in the past, are there certain traits or characteristics that you look for in prospective candidates? I think there are, and that, as you could probably guess, that they are linked to what I see as important factors in people sort of moving up and then essentially taking this my sort of role in future. I think one is organization. I know it's really boring, but if you're in an operations or finance-based role, there is so much cyclical work that just needs to be done. And you know, as you step up, that will become increasingly so, and there will be more of it. So I just think an inability to organize it's a car crash. So that's absolutely key. So that's something I do look for. People who are late for interviews, people who go to the wrong Duke Street St James's, which is our office in London. That stuff does not look good. It's just already an indicator that you're not organised and you haven't thought ahead. So that kind of stuff is key, I think. I think the second one really is, again, talked about it before, but an ability or a keenness, I guess, to take responsibility, not just doing their bit of work, but really seeking to understand the full process, take on as much as they possibly can within reason. With an ability to perform. That has 2 benefits. It benefits them developing and sort of being able to step up in future. It also benefits me, obviously, because it means I can shift more work to them and it will free me up to take more on as well myself. So that's a big one. And the third one is communication, which I've already talked about. If a candidate is struggling to get their points across or cannot talk to their technical abilities and what they've achieved in the past, that to me
bit of a warning sign. I think it's absolutely key to a financial role, especially if you want to get to a certain level, that, as I've said before, you need to be able to talk through and talk to non-financial guys about financial stuff, be able to distill and get that point across quite succinctly.
Yeah.
If you can't, like I said before, you're going to lose them, and your message will be lost, and essentially your work will be meaningless. So those are the three big ones for me, I think, when I'm looking at candidates.
And with finance professionals, you know, you mentioned a point around the entrepreneurial spirit within DRC. I guess you also need people who are able to, I guess, demonstrate that freedom of thought or thinking outside the box, right? And almost kind of placing the onus on the candidate, that so that you want people who see the opportunity that's available, as opposed to it just being an accounting role or a reporting role. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's right. I guess I didn't do that deliberately, but I guess that's what's happened at DRC for me, is that, you know, I joined as a number two. I joined to do audits, quarterly reporting, you know, a bit of investor facing stuff, but really that was the, you know, the nuts and bolts of the finance stuff was what I was brought in to do. With a business of that type and size, I wasn't able to sort of grab hold of a load more stuff that maybe typically wouldn't sit under the FC role. It enabled my development. It also kept me really interested. So I think, yeah, if candidates can demonstrate that and actually genuinely have that ability and desire to take more on, to vary their role, to keep it interesting, I think, yeah, that's a real string to their bow and will help them ultimately get where they want to, I think.
Perfect. I guess my next question for you, Steve, and this is one I'm probably the most interested in hearing your take on this, is partly because, you know, in some respects, your journey has been quite orthodox. You know, you did the ACA, you spent some time in industry, earned your stripes kind of thing. But I guess at the same time, what you've managed to do internally at DRC in terms of making that step up and not necessarily having to move externally to become a CFO. I guess I'd be interested to understand, if you were sat in a room full of fund controllers now, you know, what advice would you give them in terms of, you know, areas that they should be thinking about developing or working on in order to make that transition?
Yeah, I think, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I think communication, absolutely key. You know, some of these managing partners, CEOs that you're going to speak to, they won't have long. So getting a point across, being a, you know, strong enough personality to A, hold your ground, and B, get your points across in a succinct manner is absolutely key. So that's something I definitely say. The other one is not just a keenness, but demonstrating your keenness in taking more responsibility on. No manager should ever have an issue with you wanting to understand more about what their work's contributing to, understand more about the business strategy, note and, you know, understand how their work contributes to that. If they do, you're in the wrong job, but more than likely they won't. And I think that, and sort of, you know, with a view to maybe that candidate taking on more work, more responsibility to help contribute to that, that's ultimately going to ring a few bells with the powers that be, that, you know, this person is A, able, and B, keen to take more on. Maybe we start thinking about bumping them up. You know, maybe they're the future leaders that we need to start working towards. So those are the two big ones, I think, that for any FC, from my experience, that's what they should start thinking about, what they should start focusing on.
Perfect. Thank you. So now moving forward from, I guess looking forward, sorry. What do the next 12 to 24 months look for Steve and or DRC? What do you feel? I guess, are there certain key areas or challenges that the industry is facing that you recognise as being quite prominent in your day-to-day role? Or
it's a good question. And yes, there are. I think there's two biggies for us. One of them is the buzzword at the moment, which is ESG. Obviously, it's really gathered pace and has become more of something in the forefront in the last probably 12 to 24 months. everyone's trying to get to grips with new regulations and what that means and what you need to do, what you need to report, blah, blah, blah. But also, so that's side one of it, and we need to make sure that we're set up for that side of things. But the other side of it is, can you commercialize it? Can you get to grips with that area and develop so much in that area that it becomes almost a competitive advantage? Could we, as a real estate debt fund sort of advisor, launch a product that is geared towards that area, particularly maybe the E with property, with environmental stuff? That's something that's going to be a big focus for the business and me internally over the next 12 to 24 months, I'd say.
Okay.
The other big one is data. I have to say it's my managing partner's favorite word when he's talking to me. He's always banging on about data. He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
When I joined, we'd done about maybe 30 or 40 loans at DRC. We've now done sort of 150 up to 175 now. Quarterly reporting from borrowers, real estate values every year, funds. We've got sort of 10 plus funds in the market now. Quarterly information. We've got so many data points now, let alone all the stuff just on the real estate that we're lending against, that if we can somehow amalgamate and sort of generate, interesting output from that will be a real weapon for us. I think it will guide us on sort of marketing materials and how we present our business and our industry to investors. It will also help me in my role in analyzing fund performance. It will help us monitor investments and maybe, in the wake of COVID-19, their performance and any things that we need to focus on more. So I think data is key. I think obviously it's going to lead itself to probably technological solutions in that area. So I think that's a big area of focus for us as a business, but I think for the industry as well. I think private equity firms probably need to, I think some of them are ahead of others in terms of how they sort of manage that area, and it's going to be a big focus for DRC over the next couple of years.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, definitely a common theme with a lot of our other clients as well, the point around, well, both ESG and data. So definitely, I think as you guys grow as well, right, the volume of data needs to be managed, but also to your point, it needs to be presented or communicated.
Yeah, it kind of links to the communication point actually, because you've got all this stuff which is in Excel or whatever program you're using. That's great, but how can you actually turn that, communicate that to the bosses, to investors, to anyone, to show something that's really worthwhile? That's key. We're quite good at it, but we really want to develop it.
Room for improvement, or watch this space.
Exactly.
Cool. So finally, let's imagine we're sat in a room with young. Well, I say young Steve. You're still. I guess if you were speaking to newly qualified Steve, for example, or graduate Steve, what would you, with the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give him?
This is a really good question, and one that I actually struggled with for a little while, and then all of a sudden alarm bells went off. First one is, before, and I'm conscious I'm talking to a recruiter here, so you probably don't want to hear this, but before you take a move, I would suggest that you talk to your manager about any issue, or maybe the ultimate owner of the business, if it's sort of that size. Talk to your manager about any concerns, or ultimately the driving force behind you thinking that you need to leave. I probably took one move too many. I haven't, I've been at DRC for 6.5 years, but I did hop around a little bit in sort of, the middle part of my career to so far, I'd say. Probably took one move too many, and actually once I'd sort of confirmed that I was going to leave and had sort of accepted a role somewhere else, I then made it public within the company that I worked for. And actually, once I'd spoken to them, I wouldn't say I regretted it because I was ready to leave, but it could have been avoided. It's linked to the point earlier where I said, no manager will not want you to ask about strategy. No manager will unless he just doesn't rate you and you shouldn't be there anyway. Then no manager will ever say, we can't do anything for you if you suggest that you're going to leave and you're valued there. So I think that was something that I've learned, and something that, yeah, I definitely advised the younger Steve in the early part of my career.
Yep.
I think the second one is building industry relationships. I just think if you stay in contact with people that you work with, stay in contact with other, other advisors and third parties that you have worked with in the past, and also attend sort of industry events, drinks, whatever, when they're on. I just think at the time it feels like a bit of a chore, maybe on a Wednesday night, that you have to go to these industry drinks and socialize with a bunch of accountants that you don't really know that well. But actually, in the more recent latter part of my career, I think sort of talking to contacts that I built up, either peers or third parties, as the breadth of my role has increased, there's been things that have come onto my desk that I'm sort of less aware of, or less familiar with, that I can then run by some peers that I've built up relationships with, or ultimately, if I have requirements internally on new areas of business or whatever, then building up third party advisor relationships also helps with that. It's kind of, you're not starting from from a dot. You have some people that you can reach out to sort of help you with that stuff. So it feels like a chore maybe at the time, but I think it is important, increasingly important, as you develop and the breadth of your role increases.
Yep.
The third one I think I've already touched upon, but it's you should use your team and delegate. It's that point that you said, Khuram, absolutely right, that if a lot of guys, especially those that have moved up the ranks quickly and pride themselves on taking responsibility, like maybe I did, or I do, the willingness or the ability to think about giving more work away. Yes, there might be some management. Yes, there might be a slight dip in how things are done for a short period, but ultimately it's going to benefit you, and it's going to benefit the other person that's working for you, or people that are working for you. Yep. It's going to free you up, and ultimately it's going to make you look a better manager and a better candidate for a managerial role if you can delegate. Probably held me back to an extent for a short period, where I was not able to take on more work because I was already slammed with the stuff that I was doing. So I think, younger me, if I'd have delegated and sort of used my team to their full effectiveness earlier, it might have helped. So I'd probably put that as number 3.
Cool. Yeah, that felt quite reflective. Yeah, no, it's but I guess it's part of the learning curve and part of your own growth, right? So I guess the positive is that you can now look back and identify these factors as things that you could have embraced sooner or done differently. So
yeah, but I guess that's why I thought this podcasting was quite good. Yeah, I've had to learn from my own experiences, and I had to go through those things to an extent. I had to learn from doing. If an FC or someone working their way up can see this and just can start thinking about how they plan for that, they'll obviously have to learn from their own stuff and their own mistakes or challenges. But if that helps, then great, because it's definitely stuff that's been relevant and I've sort of learned from. But so I think this podcast is a good idea. I would have liked to see this in the past, and I look forward to seeing other guys talking about their stuff as well.
No, thank you. Well, look, Steve, it's been a pleasure, and appreciate you taking the time out of your day and also giving some thought to the questions and coming through with some interesting insights. So look, I look forward to hopefully catching up with you soon once it feels like we're almost at the end of the tunnel and we'll be able to meet in person again soon. But thanks again for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Khuram.
All right, take care.